elderly woman ignored by her children on Christmas. But when she opens the door to a stranger, her life takes an unexpected turn. Hello, welcome, leave a like, subscribe, activate notifications, and enjoy this story. On a cold Christmas Eve, while families gather around warm hearths, sharing laughter and love, one elderly woman sits alone in her quiet home. Her children, once the center of her world, have grown distant, leaving her to face the most joyful time of the year in heart-wrenching solitude. But just as the weight of loneliness threatens to consume her, a soft knock on the door shatters the silence. Who could it be on a night like this? With trembling hands and a heart full of both fear and hope, she opens the door, unaware that the person standing on her doorstep is about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. The warmth of human connection she so desperately yearns for is within reach, but at what cost? What unfolds next is a journey filled with unexpected turns, deep secrets, and a powerful revelation that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, family, and redemption. The bitter cold of a New York City winter night seeped through the thin walls of Maria Rodriguez's modest apartment in Queens. At 78 years old, Maria sat alone in her dimly lit living room, the only sound the faint ticking of an old clock on the mantel. Her arthritic hands trembled as she reached for a framed photograph on the side table, her wrinkled fingers tracing the smiling faces of her children from happier times. "Feliz Navidad, mis amores," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. The words hung in the air, unanswered, a stark reminder of her solitude on what should have been the most joyous night of the year. Maria's eyes welled with tears as she gazed at the empty chairs around her small dining table. She had spent days preparing a traditional Christmas dinner pernil, arroz con gandules, and her famous flan, hoping against hope that her children might surprise her with a visit. But as the hours ticked by, the food grew cold, and her heart grew heavier. Her oldest son, Michael, had curtly texted earlier, "Merry Christmas, Mom. Busy with the kids. Maybe next year." No call, no explanation. Her daughter, Carmen, hadn't even bothered to respond to Maria's voicemail, and Luis, her youngest, had moved to California years ago, barely keeping in touch except for the occasional impersonal email. The apartment felt cavernous in its emptiness, a far cry from the warm, laughter-filled home it had once been. Maria's mind drifted back to Christmases past, the excited squeals of her children as they opened presents, the aromatic scent of coquito filling the air, and the warm embrace of her late husband, Roberto. Now, all that remained were fading memories and the crushing weight of abandonment. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes, startling Maria from her reverie. She clutched her worn rosary beads, silently praying for strength. "Dios mío," she murmured. "Por qué me han olvidado?" The question, "Why have they forgotten me?" echoed in the stillness, unanswered. As if in cruel mockery of her loneliness, the sounds of laughter and celebration drifted up from the street below. Families returning from midnight mass, their voices filled with joy and togetherness. Maria's lower lip quivered as she fought back a sob. She had always been the heart of her family, the one who held everyone together. Now, it seemed, she had become nothing more than a burden, an afterthought in the busy lives of her children. Rising slowly from her chair, her joints protesting with each movement, Maria shuffled to the window. The city streets glittered with Christmas lights, a beautiful but painful reminder of the festivities she was missing. Couples walked hand in hand, children skipped alongside their parents, all heading home to continue their celebrations. Maria pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling more isolated than ever in the midst of such vibrant life. She was about to turn away when a flicker of movement caught her eye. A figure, hunched against the biting wind, stumbled along the sidewalk. Even from her vantage point, Maria could see the person was inadequately dressed for the freezing temperature, wearing only a thin jacket and what appeared to be worn-out sneakers. Maria's heart clenched. Despite her own pain, the sight of someone in distress on Christmas Eve stirred something deep within her. Before she could second-guess herself, she had grabbed her heavy wool shawl and was making her way to the front door of her apartment. Her hand hesitated on the doorknob. Was she being foolish? Opening her door to a stranger in New York City, especially at her age? But something, call it Christmas spirit or simply human compassion, urged her forward. With a deep breath, Maria opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. She made her way slowly down the stairs, her cane tapping a steady rhythm. As she reached the building's entrance, she peered out through the glass door. The figure was closer now, and Maria could see it was a young man, probably in his late 20s. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow with what looked like a mixture of exhaustion and desperation. He stumbled, catching himself against the building's wall. Without further hesitation, Maria pushed open the door. "Young man," she called out, her accent thick with concern. "Are you all right?" The stranger's head snapped up, surprise evident in his features. For a moment, he seemed ready to bolt, but then his shoulders sagged in defeat. I'm sorry," he stammered, his teeth chattering from the cold. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I'll move along." "Nonsense," Maria said firmly, her maternal instincts kicking in despite years of disuse. "You'll catch your death out here. Come inside, at least warm up for a bit." The young man hesitated, conflict clear on his face. "I couldn't impose. It's Christmas Eve." Maria felt a lump form in her throat. "Yes," she said softly. "It is, and no one should be alone on Christmas Eve." She held out her hand, a gentle invitation. "Please come in. I have more than enough food for two." For a long moment, the stranger stood frozen, indecision written across his features. Then, slowly, he nodded, taking a tentative step towards her. As he came closer, Maria could see the desperation in his eyes, mixed with a flicker of something else, hope, perhaps? As they entered the building together, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was about to change everything. Little did she know just how prophetic that feeling would prove to be, or how this unexpected visitor would set in motion a chain of events that would not only transform her life, but heal wounds she thought would remain forever unhealed. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold and ushering in a night of unexpected connections, revelations, and the rekindling of a spirit Maria had thought long extinguished. As they ascended the stairs to her apartment, the old clock in her living room struck midnight, heralding the arrival of Christmas Day and the beginning of an extraordinary journey neither could have anticipated. As Maria ushered the young man into her apartment, the warmth enveloped them both, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. She watched as he stood awkwardly in the entryway, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the modest but cozy surroundings. "Come, sit by the radiator," Maria urged, gesturing towards an old armchair. "You're shivering like a leaf in autumn." The stranger moved hesitantly, as if afraid his presence might somehow taint the Christmas decorations that adorned the small living room. As he lowered himself into the chair, Maria noticed how his clothes hung loosely on his thin frame. "I'm Maria," she said, her voice gentle. "And you are?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Daniel. My name is Daniel." Maria nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Well, Daniel, you look like you could use some warm food in your belly. I hope you like pernil and arroz con gandals." Before Daniel could protest, Maria had shuffled off to the kitchen. The sounds of pots clanging and the microwave humming filled the apartment. Daniel sat rigid in the chair, his eyes continually scanning the room, lingering on the family photos that lined the walls and shelves. When Maria returned with a steaming plate of food and a mug of hot chocolate, Daniel's eyes widened. "Ma'am, this is too much. I can't possibly." "Nonsense." Maria cut him off, her tone brooking no argument. "It's Christmas, Majito, and this food was meant to be shared." As Daniel began to eat, at first tentatively and then with increasing gusto, Maria settled into the chair opposite him. She couldn't help but notice the way his eyes kept darting to the photos, particularly one of a young man in a graduation gown. "That's my youngest, Luis," Maria said, nodding towards the photo. "He lives in California now, a big-shot lawyer." She tried to keep the pride in her voice, masking the hurt of his absence. Daniel swallowed hard, his eyes meeting Maria's for a brief moment before looking away. "You must be very proud," he said softly. Maria sighed, her gaze drifting to the other photos. "I am. Of all my children, Michael, Carmen, and Luis. They've all done well for themselves." She paused, a hint of sadness creeping into her voice. "But success, it changes people, makes them forget where they came from, who was there for them." Daniel set his fork down, his food half finished. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That must be very difficult." Maria waved her hand dismissively, forcing a smile. But enough about my troubles. Tell me, Daniel, what brings you out on a night like this? Surely you have family worried about you?" The question seemed to hit Daniel like a physical blow. He flinched, his shoulders hunching as if trying to make himself smaller. I don't have anyone," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Not anymore." Maria leaned forward, her heart aching at the pain evident in the young man's eyes. "What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the pattern on the armchair. When he spoke, his voice was low, filled with regret. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I hurt the people who loved me most. My mother, she tried so hard to help me, but I pushed her away. Said things I can never take back." As he spoke, Maria couldn't help but see flashes of her own Luis in Daniel's face. The same haunted look, the same burden of unspoken regrets. She found herself reaching out, patting Daniel's hand gently. "The heart of a mother is a deep abyss at the bottom of which you will always find forgiveness," she said softly, quoting a saying her own mother had often repeated. Daniel's eyes met hers, a glimmer of hope battling with the shadows of guilt. "Do you really believe that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Maria nodded firmly. "With all my heart. No matter what my children do, no matter how far they stray, I will always love them, always be ready to welcome them home." Something in Daniel's expression shifted, a mixture of longing and fear crossing his features. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again, looking away. Maria felt a strange connection to this young man, a pull she couldn't quite explain. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at her heartstrings in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Daniel," she said gently, "whatever it is you're running from, whatever mistakes you've made, it's never too late to make things right." Daniel's eyes welled with tears, and he quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. "I wish that were true," he murmured. As Maria watched him struggle with his emotions, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Daniel's story than he was letting on. The way he looked at the family photos, the pain in his eyes when she spoke of forgiveness. It all hinted at a deeper connection, a story yet to be revealed. "It's getting late," Maria said, noticing Daniel stifling a yawn. "You must be exhausted. Why don't you stay the night? I have a spare room, and it's much too cold for you to go back out there." Daniel's eyes widened in surprise. "I couldn't possibly." "I insist," Maria said firmly. "Consider it my Christmas gift to you." After a moment's hesitation, Daniel nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. As Maria led him to the spare room, she couldn't help but feel that this unexpected visitor was about to change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As she settled into her own bed that night, Maria's thoughts were filled with Daniel's story and the strange sense of familiarity she felt towards him. Little did she know that the coming days would unravel a mystery that would shake the very foundations of her world, bringing with it pain, joy, and a chance at redemption that she had long thought impossible. The clock in the living room chimed midnight, marking the official start of Christmas Day. In the quiet of her apartment, with a stranger sleeping just down the hall, Maria felt a glimmer of hope she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she was no longer alone on this holy night. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains of Maria's apartment, casting a warm glow on the Christmas decorations that adorned her living room. As she stirred from her sleep, the events of the previous night came rushing back to her. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream. The mysterious young man, the unexpected company on a lonely Christmas Eve. But as she made her way to the kitchen, the sound of quiet movement from the spare room confirmed that it had indeed been real. Daniel was still here. Maria busied herself with preparing breakfast, the familiar routine of making café con leche and tostadas bringing a sense of normalcy to this extraordinary situation. As the rich aroma of coffee filled the apartment, she heard the creak of the spare room door opening. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, his eyes still carrying the weight of unspoken burdens. "Good morning, Mrs. Rodriguez," he said softly. I can't thank you enough for your kindness." Maria waved away his thanks with a gentle smile. "Mijo, it's Christmas. And please, call me Maria." As they sat down to breakfast, an awkward silence settled between them. Maria could sense that Daniel was struggling with something, his eyes darting nervously around the room, never quite meeting hers. "Daniel," she said gently, breaking the silence, "I hope you know that you're welcome to stay as long as you need. But I can't help but wonder, what brought you to my doorstep last night?" Daniel's hands tightened around his coffee mug, his knuckles turning white. For a long moment he said nothing, and Maria feared she had pushed too far. But then, with a deep breath, he began to speak. "I've been searching," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for a long time, trying to find the courage to face my past, to make amends for the hurt I've caused." Maria listened intently, her heart aching at the pain evident in Daniel's voice. "I had a mother who loved me more than anything," Daniel continued, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I was young, stupid. I got mixed up with the wrong crowd, started using drugs. I said terrible things to her, stole from her. The last time I saw her, I told her I hated her, that I never wanted to see her again." A sob escaped Daniel's throat, and Maria instinctively reached out, placing her hand over his. "I've been clean for 3 years now," he said, his voice shaky. "But the guilt, it's eating me alive. I've been trying to find her, to beg for forgiveness. But I'm terrified that it's too late, that she'll never want to see me again." As Daniel spoke, Maria felt a strange stirring in her heart. There was something about his story that resonated deeply with her, echoing the pain she felt over her own estranged children. "Daniel," she said softly, "the love of a mother is unconditional. I'm sure if you reach out to her, she'll—" But before she could finish, Daniel interrupted, his words tumbling out in a rush. "There's something else, Maria. Something I haven't told you." He paused, taking a deep breath. "The reason I was in your neighborhood last night, I think I found her, my mother. But I couldn't bring myself to knock on her door. I was too afraid." Maria felt her heart skip a beat. Could it be possible? The timing, the circumstances. It all seemed too incredible to be mere coincidence. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "What's your mother's name?" Daniel looked up, meeting Maria's eyes for the first time since he began speaking. "Maria," he said softly. "Her name is Maria Rodriguez." The world seemed to stand still as the weight of Daniel's words sank in. Maria felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Could this young man, this stranger she had taken in on Christmas Eve, possibly be her long-lost son? "Luis?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Daniel or Luis nodded, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Mama," he choked out. "I'm so sorry." In that moment, all the years of pain, loneliness, and regret seemed to melt away. Maria rose from her chair, her legs shaky but her heart sure. She crossed the small distance between them and enveloped her son in a fierce embrace. "My boy," she sobbed, stroking his hair as she had done when he was a child. "My precious boy, you've come home." As they clung to each other, both weeping openly, the morning sun streamed through the window, bathing them in golden light. Outside, the sounds of Christmas Day in New York City began to fill the air, church bells ringing, children laughing as they played with new toys, families gathering for celebration. But for Maria and Luis, the world had narrowed to this moment, this miraculous reunion. They had found each other again, against all odds, on a night when hope seemed lost. As they began to talk, to share the stories of the years they had missed, Maria felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This Christmas, which had started in such lonely despair, had become a day of redemption, of second chances. Yet even as joy filled her heart, Maria couldn't help but think of her other children, still distant and disconnected. She silently prayed that this miracle might be just the beginning, that the healing that had begun here might extend to her entire family. For now, though, she held her son close, savoring each moment. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trusts to rebuild. But they had taken the first step, and that was enough. As the day wore on, filled with tears and laughter, confessions and forgiveness, Maria felt a peace she hadn't known in years. This Christmas had brought her the greatest gift of all, the return of her prodigal son, and with him, the rekindling of hope for her family's future. As the days following Christmas melted into the final week of December, Maria's small apartment in Queens became a cocoon of healing and rediscovery. The initial shock and overwhelming emotion of Luis's revelation had given way to a tentative dance of reconnection. As mother and son navigated the delicate terrain of their shared past and uncertain future, Maria found herself studying Luis's face at odd moments, marveling at how the boy she remembered had transformed into this man before her. The hollows in his cheeks spoke of hardship, while the careful way he moved through her home, as if afraid to disturb the air, revealed a deep-seated guilt that broke her heart. "Mijo," she said one morning, as they sat sharing coffee and pan dulce, "tell me about your life now. What do you do?" Luis's fingers tightened around his mug. I work at a community center in the Bronx," he said softly, "helping kids who are struggling with addiction, trying to keep them from making the same mistakes I did." Pride swelled in Maria's chest, mingling with a bittersweet ache for the years lost. "That's wonderful, Luis. You always had such a big heart." A ghost of a smile touched Luis's lips, but his eyes remained shadowed. "I don't know about that, Mama. I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of." Maria reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "We all have regrets, Mijo. What matters is what we do with them." As they talked, Maria couldn't help but notice how Luis's gaze often drifted to the family photos on the walls. His eyes would linger on images of his siblings, Michael and Carmen, a mixture of longing and fear crossing his features. "Have you thought about reaching out to them?" Maria asked gently. Luis shook his head, his shoulders tensing. "I wouldn't know what to say. After everything, I don't think they'd want to hear from me." Maria felt her heart constrict. The weight of unspoken words and unresolved hurts seemed to fill the room, a tangible presence between them. She thought of Michael and Carmen, of their curt messages and prolonged absences. How had her family become so fractured? As the days passed, a rhythm began to develop. Luis would leave early each morning for work, returning in the evenings with stories of the young people he was trying to help. Maria found herself looking forward to these moments, when her son's eyes would light up with passion for his work, the shadows momentarily receding. But there were other moments too, times when Luis would grow quiet and withdrawn, lost in memories or regrets he wasn't ready to share. Maria learned to give him space during these times, busying herself with cooking or tending to her small collection of houseplants. One evening, as Maria was preparing dinner, she heard a sharp intake of breath from the living room. She found Luis standing by the bookshelf, holding a small, battered photo album. "I remember this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He turned the album towards her, revealing a faded photograph of a much younger Maria and Roberto, surrounded by their children at Coney Island. "Dad's birthday, right? The year before he..." Maria nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Roberto's absence was a wound that had never fully healed, for any of them. Luis traced the outline of his father's face with a trembling finger. I wish he could have seen me turn my life around, that I could tell him I'm sorry for all the pain I caused." Maria moved to her son's side, wrapping an arm around his waist. "He knows, Mijo," she said softly. "Wherever he is, he knows. And he's proud of you, just as I am." Luis leaned into her embrace, his body shaking with silent sobs. As Maria held him, she felt something shift between them, a deepening of their reconnection, a silent acknowledgement of the long road they had traveled and the journey still ahead. Later that night, as Maria lay in bed listening to the quiet sounds of Luis moving about in the spare room, her thoughts turned to her other children. The new year was approaching, bringing with it the promise of fresh starts and second chances. Perhaps, she thought, it was time to bridge the gaps that had grown between them all. With a sense of determination she hadn't felt in years, Maria reached for her phone on the nightstand. Her fingers hovered over Michael's number for a long moment before she took a deep breath and pressed call. As the phone rang, Maria sent up a silent prayer. Luis's unexpected return had been a miracle. Could she dare hope for another? Could this be the beginning of healing for her entire family? The ringing stopped, and Maria heard Michael's voice, tentative and surprised. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Yes, Mijito," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Everything is okay, but there's something important we need to talk about. Are you free for dinner this weekend? There's someone I'd like you to meet." As she spoke, Maria could hear Luis's footsteps pause outside her door. In that moment, standing on the threshold of revelation and reunion, she felt a surge of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever hurts needed to be healed, they would face them together as a family. The new year was dawning, bringing with it the promise of reconciliation and new beginnings. As Maria ended the call with Michael, setting plans in motion, she felt a peace settle over her. The journey ahead would not be easy, but with love and forgiveness as their guides, anything was possible. The crisp January air nipped at Maria's cheeks as she bustled about her small kitchen, the comforting aroma of simmering sofrito filling the apartment. Tonight was the night. Michael was coming for dinner, and the weight of anticipation hung heavy in the air. Luis paced nervously in the living room, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his freshly ironed shirt. "Maybe this isn't a good idea, Mama," he said for what felt like the 100th time. "What if he doesn't want to see me? What if—" "Enough, Mijo," Maria interrupted gently but firmly. "Your brother deserves the chance to know you've changed, to see the man you've become." Before Luis could respond, a sharp knock at the door made them both freeze. Maria's eyes met her son's, seeing her own mix of hope and fear reflected back at her. "I'll get it," she said softly, patting Luis's arm as she passed. Maria took a deep breath, smoothing her hair before opening the door. There stood Michael, looking every bit the successful businessman in his tailored coat, a bottle of wine in hand. "Feliz Año Nuevo, Mama," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Happy New Year, Mijito," Maria replied, ushering him inside. "Thank you for coming." As Michael shrugged off his coat, his eyes scanned the apartment, clearly sensing something was different. "So, who's this mystery guest you wanted me to?" His words died on his lips as he caught sight of Luis, who had stepped hesitantly into view. The bottle of wine slipped from Michael's grasp, shattering on the floor and splattering red across the worn linoleum. "Luis!" Michael's voice was barely a whisper, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Luis stood frozen, looking for all the world like he wanted to disappear. "Hey, Mike," he said softly, using the childhood nickname that suddenly seemed to bridge the years between them. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the gentle bubbling of the sofrito on the stove, a homey counterpoint to the tension that crackled in the air. Then, without warning, Michael lunged forward. Maria's heart leapt into her throat, fearing a violent confrontation. But instead of throwing a punch, Michael wrapped his arms around his younger brother in a fierce embrace. "You stupid, selfish pendejo," Michael choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "Where the hell have you been?" Luis stood rigid for a moment before melting into his brother's embrace, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Maria watched her sons, tears streaming down her cheeks. This was more than she had dared to hope for, a reunion not just of bodies, but of hearts. As the initial shock wore off, the three of them moved to the small dining table. The planned dinner was momentarily forgotten as Luis began to share his story, the depths of his addiction, his journey to recovery, and his work at the community center. Michael listened intently, his expression a mix of pain, anger, and growing understanding. When Luis spoke of his fear of reaching out, of the shame that had kept him away for so long, Michael's hand found his brother's across the table. "We looked for you," Michael said, his voice raw. "For years. Carmen and I. We hired private investigators, checked hospitals, rehab centers. We thought you were dead." Luis's head bowed under the weight of this revelation. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I convinced myself you'd all be better off without me." "Never," Michael said fiercely. "Your family, Luis, no matter what." As the night wore on, the initial tension gave way to cautious reconnection. Old jokes were hesitantly revisited, shared memories carefully unearthed. Maria watched her sons, marveling at how the years seemed to melt away in moments, only to reassert themselves in flashes of adult wariness. It wasn't until much later, as Michael was preparing to leave, that he turned to Maria with a questioning look. "Does Carmen know?" he asked. Maria shook her head. "Not yet. I wasn't sure how to tell her." Michael nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. Their sister had always been the most sensitive, the one who had taken Luis's disappearance the hardest. "Let me talk to her," Michael offered. "Prepare her a little. Maybe we can all get together next weekend." As Maria closed the door behind Michael, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and elation. The evening had been a roller coaster of emotions, but it had also been a breakthrough. For the first time in years, she dared to hope that her family might truly be whole again. Luis appeared beside her, his eyes red-rimmed but shining with a cautious hope. "Thank you, Mama," he said softly, "for believing in me, for giving me this chance." Maria cupped her son's face in her hands, seeing in it both the boy he had been and the man he had become. "My love for you never wavered, Mijo. Not for a single moment." As they began to clean up the remnants of the evening, wiping up spilled wine, putting away barely touched food, Maria felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still wounds to heal, trusts to rebuild. Carmen's reaction was yet unknown, and the deeper issues that had fractured their family still needed to be addressed. But tonight had been a start. Turning point. As Maria looked at Luis, saw the tentative smile on his face as he recounted something Michael had said, she knew that this new year truly did mark a new beginning for their family. The healing had begun, born from an unexpected Christmas miracle and nurtured by the enduring power of a mother's love. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, reunited at last. The week following Michael's visit passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Maria found herself constantly straightening up the apartment, as if the perfect arrangement of throw pillows could somehow ease the emotional turmoil that lay ahead. Luis, for his part, seemed to alternate between bouts of hopeful energy and periods of quiet withdrawal. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon when the doorbell finally rang. Maria exchanged a look with Luis, who had retreated to the far corner of the living room. Before opening the door, there stood Carmen, her dark hair swept up in a neat bun, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Behind her, Michael offered an encouraging nod. "Mama," Carmen said, embracing Maria tightly. "What's going on?" Michael said it was important, but he wouldn't tell me. Her words cut off abruptly as she caught sight of Luis over Maria's shoulder. The color drained from Carmen's face, and for a moment, Maria feared she might faint. "Luis." Carmen's voice was barely a whisper, disbelief etched across her features. Luis stepped forward hesitantly, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Hey, Carm," he said softly, using the childhood nickname that suddenly seemed to bridge the chasm of years between them. What happened next was so swift that Maria barely had time to react. Carmen lunged forward, her hand connecting with Luis's cheek in a resounding slap that echoed through the small apartment. "How dare you?" Carmen hissed, tears streaming down her face. How dare you come back now after all this time? Luis stood there, accepting the blow without flinching, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and understanding. I deserve that, he said quietly. I deserve so much worse. Carmen's anger seemed to deflate at his words, replaced by a wave of grief so palpable that Maria felt her own heart constrict. Without warning, Carmen collapsed against Luis, her body racked with sobs. Luis wrapped his arms around his sister, his own tears falling silently. I'm so sorry, Carm, he murmured into her hair. I'm so sorry. Maria and Michael watched the scene unfold, both too overwhelmed to intervene. This raw outpouring of emotion was years in the making, a necessary catharsis before any healing could truly begin. As Carmen's sobs subsided, the family moved to the living room. Luis began to share his story once again, the depths of his addiction, his struggles with recovery, and the work he now did to help others avoid the same pitfalls. Carmen listened in silence, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions. When Luis spoke of his shame, of the fear that had kept him from reaching out for so long, she reached for his hand. We never stopped looking for you, she said, her voice hoarse. Every time the phone rang, every knock at the door, I always hoped it would be you. Luis bowed his head, the weight of his choices clearly visible in the slump of his shoulders. I convinced myself you'd all be better off without me, he admitted, that I'd caused too much pain to ever be forgiven. Oh, Luis, Carmen sighed, squeezing his hand. You're our brother. Nothing could ever change that. As the afternoon wore on, the initial tension began to ease. Old stories were cautiously revisited, shared memories carefully unearthed. Maria watched her children, marveling at how the years seemed to melt away in moments, only to reassert themselves in flashes of adult wariness. It wasn't until the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the room, that Carmen turned to Maria with a questioning look. Mama, she said softly, how long have you known about Luis being back? Maria took a deep breath, knowing that her answer could potentially reopen wounds that were just beginning to heal. Since Christmas Eve, she admitted. He came to me, though neither of us knew it at first. She went on to explain the events of that night, the mysterious stranger at her door, the gradual revelations, and the miracle of reconciliation that had unfolded. As Maria spoke, she could see a range of emotions flicker across Carmen's face: hurt, confusion, and finally, a grudging understanding. Why didn't you tell us right away? Carmen asked, her voice small. Maria reached out, taking her daughter's hand. I needed time, she said gently. We both did, to reconnect, to make sure this was real, that Luis was truly ready to come home. Luis nodded, his eyes meeting each of his siblings in turn. I needed to prove to myself that I could be the brother you deserved, he said, that I wasn't going to disappear again at the first sign of trouble. A heavy silence fell over the room as the weight of Luis's words sank in. It was Michael who finally broke it, clearing his throat. So, he said, a hint of his old mischievous grin tugging at his lips. Does this mean we're going to start having family dinners again? Because I've really missed Mama's eras con gandals. The tension in the room broke, replaced by tentative laughter, as Maria looked around at her children, all together under one roof for the first time in years. She felt a surge of hope so strong it brought tears to her eyes. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still hurts to heal, trusts to rebuild. The deeper issues that had fractured their family in the first place would need to be addressed. But this was a start, a new beginning. As the evening wound down, with promises made for future gatherings and tentative plans discussed, Maria found herself standing in the doorway, watching her children leave together. The sight of Luis walking between Michael and Carmen, their heads bent close in conversation, was one she had feared she might never see again. When she closed the door, turning back to her now quiet apartment, Maria felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The miracle that had begun on Christmas Eve had blossomed into something beautiful, the rebirth of her family. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. united once more by the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As winter gradually gave way to spring, the Rodriguez family began the delicate process of rebuilding their relationships. Weekly dinners became a new tradition, with Maria's small apartment filled with the sounds of laughter, heated discussions, and the occasional argument. All signs of a family learning to be whole again. One particularly mild evening in early April, Maria found herself sitting on her tiny balcony, watching as Luis tended to the small herb garden they had started together. The simple act of nurturing new life seemed to be therapeutic for him, a tangible representation of his own journey of growth and renewal. "Mama," Luis called softly, holding up a flourishing basil plant. "Look how well it's doing. Remember when we thought it wouldn't make it?" Maria smiled, remembering the day they had planted the seeds, Luis's hands shaking slightly as he carefully placed each one in the soil. It had been a metaphor for his own fragile new beginning, and now, like the thriving plant, he too was blossoming. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the arrival of Michael and Carmen, laden with bags of groceries for their now traditional family dinner. "We brought ingredients for paella," Carmen announced, her eyes bright with excitement. "Luis mentioned it was Dad's specialty, and we thought, well, maybe we could try to recreate it together." Maria felt her heart swell with emotion. Roberto's paella had been legendary in their family, a dish he had perfected over years of Sunday gatherings. That her children wanted to revive this tradition was a powerful gesture of healing. As they crowded into the small kitchen, each taking on a different task in the paella preparation, Maria couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. There were still moments of tension. Of course, a careless word here, a flash of old hurt there, but they were learning to navigate these waters together. While the rice simmered, filling the apartment with fragrant steam, Michael cleared his throat. "I have some news," he said, his voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I've been offered a promotion at work. It's a great opportunity, but it would mean moving to Chicago." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. The specter of separation, of distance threatening their newly rebuilt bonds, hung in the air. It was Luis who spoke first, surprising everyone. "That's amazing, Mike," he said, clapping his brother on the shoulder. "You've worked hard for this. You should go for it." Carmen nodded in agreement, though Maria could see the worry in her eyes. "We'll figure it out," she added. "Maybe we can plan regular visits or set up weekly video calls." Maria watched her children, pride swelling in her chest at their maturity, their willingness to support each other even when it was difficult. This, she realized, was the true measure of how far they had come. As they sat down to enjoy the paella, which, while not quite up to Roberto's standards, was filled with love and shared effort, the conversation turned to plans for the future. Michael's potential move became not a source of anxiety, but a catalyst for discussions about family vacations, holiday rotations, and creative ways to stay connected across the miles. Later that evening, as Maria prepared for bed, she found Luis lingering in the hallway, a pensive look on his face. "What's on your mind, Mijo?" she asked gently. Luis sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was just thinking about how different things could have been. If I hadn't come back that night, if you hadn't opened the door." Maria reached out, cupping her son's face in her hands. "But you did come back and I did open the door. That's what matters." Luis nodded, leaning into his mother's touch. "I know I've said it before, but I need you to really hear it, Mama. Thank you for never giving up on me, for giving me the chance to make things right." Tears welled in Maria's eyes as she pulled her son into a tight embrace. "My love for you never wavered, Mijo, not for a single moment, and it never will." As they stood there in the quiet hallway, holding each other close, Maria felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The journey of the past few months had not been easy. There had been tears, heated arguments, and moments of doubt. But through it all, the love that bound them together had proven stronger than the forces that had driven them apart. The Rodriguez family was whole again, not in spite of their past, but because they had found the courage to confront it, to learn from it, and to grow beyond it. As Maria drifted off to sleep that night, her heart full of gratitude, she knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, united by the unbreakable bonds of family and the enduring power of forgiveness. The miracle that had begun on a lonely Christmas Eve had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the healing power of love, and the truth that it's never too late for a new beginning. As the year drew to a close, the Rodriguez family found themselves once again gathered in Maria's small Queens apartment, preparing to celebrate Christmas. The transformation from the previous year was nothing short of miraculous. Where once there had been silence and loneliness, now laughter and warmth filled every corner. Maria stood in the kitchen, supervising the preparation of their traditional Noche Buena feast. Luis was at her side, carefully tending to the pernil in the oven, while Carmen and Michael argued good-naturedly over the best way to season the arroz con gandals. Just like Papi used to make it, Carmen insisted, waving a wooden spoon at her brother. Papi never used that much garlic, Michael countered, reaching for the spoon. Maria chuckled, shaking her head at their antics. Your father would be so proud to see you all here, she said softly, her eyes misting over with memories. The siblings paused in their debate, exchanging glances that spoke volumes. It was Luis who moved first, wrapping an arm around his mother's shoulders. He is here, Mama, he said gently. In all of us, in every recipe, every tradition we're keeping alive. As the evening progressed, the small apartment buzzed with activity. Michael's wife, Sarah, arrived with their 2 children, filling the space with excited chatter and the patter of little feet. Carmen's boyfriend, Tom, joined them as well, quickly being roped into helping with last-minute decorations. When they finally gathered around the table, the spread before them was a testament to their shared heritage and renewed bonds. Steam rose from the golden brown pernil, the arroz con gandals glistened with perfectly cooked pigeon peas, and a large bowl of ensalada de papa sat ready to be devoured. Before they began to eat, Maria raised her glass. I want to propose a toast, she said, her voice thick with emotion. To family, to second chances, and to the miracles that bring us together. To miracles, they echoed, glasses clinking in the warm glow of the Christmas lights. As they ate, stories flowed freely, tales of Christmases past, memories of Roberto, and hopes for the future. Luis shared anecdotes from his work at the community center, his eyes shining with purpose. Michael spoke of his new life in Chicago, describing how he'd found a Puerto Rican community there that reminded him of home. Carmen announced that she and Tom were thinking of starting a family of their own, news that was met with joyous exclamations and heartfelt hugs. Later, as they sat digesting their feast and sipping caquito, Maria couldn't help but marvel at the scene before her. Her children, once so distant, were now crowded together on the couch, heads bent close as they looked through old photo albums. Laughter erupted periodically, punctuated by exclamations of, "Oh, I remember that," and "Look how young we all were." As midnight approached, Luis stood up, clearing his throat nervously. "I have something I want to say," he began, his voice wavering slightly. "A year ago, I was lost, alone, convinced that I'd burned all my bridges and that there was no way back. But then, by some miracle, I found my way to Mama's door, and she opened it, not just to me, but to the possibility of healing for all of us." He paused, looking around at each family member in turn. "I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, for the years we lost, and I'm grateful, so incredibly grateful for this second chance." Tears glistened in everyone's eyes as Luis spoke. When he finished, there was a moment of profound silence before Carmen rose and wrapped her brother in a fierce hug. One by one, the others joined in, until the entire family was entwined in a group embrace, years of hurt and misunderstanding melting away in the warmth of their love. As the clock struck midnight, heralding the arrival of Christmas Day, Maria found herself overwhelmed with emotion. She thought back to the previous Christmas, to the lonely woman who had opened her door to a stranger, never imagining the journey that lay ahead. The road had not been easy. There had been difficult conversations, old wounds reopened, and moments of doubt. But through it all, the love that bound them together had proven stronger than the forces that had driven them apart. Now, watching her family, whole and healing and together, Maria felt a sense of peace and joy that she had feared might never return. The miracle that had begun on that fateful Christmas Eve had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the healing power of love, and the truth that it's never too late for a new beginning. As the family began to disperse, making plans for Christmas Day activities and exchanging final hugs, Maria found herself standing by the window, gazing out at the city lights. Luis appeared at her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Merry Christmas, Mama," he said softly. Maria leaned into her son's embrace, her heart full to bursting. "Merry Christmas, Mijo," she replied, "and thank you for coming home." As snow began to fall gently outside, blanketing the city in a soft white glow, Maria knew that this Christmas would forever stand as a reminder of the miracles that can happen when we open our hearts to forgiveness, second chances, and the enduring power of family love. Thank you very much for listening to this story. Comment below what you thought of the ending and from which city you're listening to us. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, click on the next story that's appearing on your screen now. Leave your like and subscribe to our channel so we can build a huge community that shares inspiring stories together. See you soon.